Okay, guys, I think Donal, if you could do the whole Facebook Live, that would be brilliant. Thanks very much. We'll get that ball rolling on that. Welcome to everybody again. We are flying through these virtual talks. We have only one left, which is next week. So this is our penultimate one. When we put out a shout out a few weeks ago now, Brooke Nolan, our presenter for tonight, got in contact from the south coast of England. So, in fairness, she had just returned back from the Norwegian Arctic and said she would be happy to share her story. So, we're very, very lucky. So, last week we had information gathered from the Lake District area and tonight from the south coast of England. So, it's good that the Kinvara Adventure Talks are spreading further afield. Just to give a little bit of an intro to Brooke, she is a writer and she's a communication consultant. She lives at the moment for the COVID-19 scenario on the south coast of England, but she lives in between Switzerland and Australia. So this girl definitely does get around. There's absolutely no doubt. But without further ado, if I could pass you over to Brooke, and Brooke, just don't forget to turn on your microphone. And just at the end, that's fine, yeah. At the end, if people want to ask questions, maybe just type into the text box. If there's anyone who hasn't been with us before, I see just a couple of names that maybe weren't with us the other weeks. At the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little purple tab. You can close that off to get a bigger screen, get a bigger picture on the screen, or you can open it out and type into the chat box there, and that would let you ask Brooke questions that you might like to ask her at the end. So without further ado, Brooke, over to you and enjoy the ride.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for having me today. Yeah, a little bit nervous, but hopefully you guys are going to enjoy the story as much as I enjoyed taking part in the trip. So, as Karen said, my name's Brooke, and in March this year I joined an all-female team to cross the Finnmark Plateau in the Arctic Circle in Norway. So you can see the sort of landscapes that I'm going to be showing you in this opening slide just here. There we go. There we go. So I guess first up, I should explain where and what the Finnmark Plateau is. So the Finnmark Plateau is located in the very top of Norway. It's one of Europe's largest plateaus and largest ice plains. So the trip that we were doing was 200 kilometers north to south on the Finnmark Plateau, and it's a very kind of hostile, barren environment. It's often used for training for North and South Pole expeditions, but it's also a very good beginner's trip for those types of environments. It wasn't the North Pole though, so the reason I've got lovely Santa and his reindeer there with a big cross through it is because as soon as I said Arctic and that I was skiing and cross-country skiing and pulling a poke and everything like that, everyone was like, oh, you're going to the North Pole. So I had to kind of say, no, unfortunately not, but who knows? After this trip, I feel like anything's possible. And so we did the trip. There was five women on the trip, and we did it with a company called Turgleder, who specialise in these types of expeditions. And they kind of specialise on letting normal, everyday people experience these environments that perhaps you wouldn't normally be able to do. And the aim of the trip was just over 200 kilometres north to south in 14 days. 13 nights, carrying everything we needed and camping along the way. So there you go. There's a little bit of a close-up there of the plateau with a rather crudely drawn route. It was a little bit more wiggly than that. Turns out that none of us were very good at hills, and even though it was a plateau, you'll find out later in the presentation that there's more hills than we thought. So we kind of went around and about to get from one side to the other. But that's basically where we went from Alta down to Karasjok, up there in the north of Norway. So a little bit about me. I am not related to Deirdre Barlow, but I was teased quite drastically as a child and called Deirdre a lot because of my glasses. So you can see on the left there, there's me. I must have been about 13 years old there with my big Deirdre Barlow glasses. I was very, very, very short-sighted. I was kind of -7 -7 in both eyes. So I was quite uncoordinated, and it kind of impacted my self-confidence in being able to do sports and to be able to do anything physical. So I was quite a bookish person growing up, right the way through to my late 20s. I was a reader, I was a writer, I didn't do anything physical or exercise related. It always was quite, there was a lot of kind of shame and embarrassment for me around that. So for me, this trip was hugely about doing those misconceptions about myself. So that was me as a youngster. It did all change though, without sounding too cliched. I went on a sabbatical when I was 30 for my 30th birthday. So you can see in the top left there was a picture of me, and I randomly booked a trip to do a 4-day hike on the Inca Trail for my 30th, and I absolutely loved it. I'd never done anything like it before in my life. I'd never really camped. I'd done day hikes, but I'd never carried a bag or not washed for 4 days. And I just absolutely fell in love with the outdoors, and that kind of set me on a very different kind of life trajectory. So that was 5 years ago, and shortly after that I came back. I quit my job. I moved to Australia, where I spent sort of 4 years really discovering my love of the outdoors. Hiked all over Australia. So the bottom right with the fly net is the Larapinta Trail in the outback. I did some hiking in New Zealand, which you can see on the left, and then top right is me doing the Drakensberg Grand Traverse in Africa last year, which is another incredible trip, but I failed miserably at it. I got a knee injury on that 250k hike. So that was 250k's in 13 days, and I got a knee injury. So that was my first big, and I failed quite miserably at it, and had to leave early. But basically what I discovered was hiking, and that has been my savior really over the last 5 years. And it made me realize that you don't need to love hockey, you don't need to love netball, you don't need to love going to the gym, you don't need to care about protein shakes and counting macros, whatever a macro is. I don't even know what that is. To be able to be fit and healthy, you could get outside, put one foot in front of the other, and enjoy being outdoors and enjoy seeing what you're capable of. How do you go from hiking to cross-country skiing? So I had never been on skis before this trip, and the idea of pulling a sled behind me for 200 kilometers was absolutely terrifying. So I did what Liv, the owner of Turgleder, recommended, which was pulling tires to kind of train on your core strength. So on the left-hand side, you can see me at 6:30 in the morning on the shores of Lake Geneva, which is where I normally live at the moment in Switzerland, but I'm stuck in the UK because of COVID. We'll get to that. So that's me kind of sweating after a workout in the morning. And on the right-hand side, you will see my friends / enemies, Trevor and Tim, who we had many arguments on our trips out together. It turns out tires are really hard to pull, particularly on wet tarmac. They give you the best workout on wet tarmac. And when you hit gravel, it's so much fun. You just suddenly realize that they're there. And it's kind of like it with a polk. Sometimes you'll be pulling the polk and you're like, and then you'll hit a smooth patch and you don't even realize it. So the tires were actually really great training. I also had a personal trainer as well. I'm not very motivated. So yeah, I actually had a personal trainer there as well. And I also was very lucky living in Switzerland because I'd never been on skis when I booked this trip. I got myself a cross-country skiing session, 45 minutes with a wonderful instructor, kind of taught me how to do the movement of sliding. After 20 minutes, she let me pull her kid around. So this is my first ever time on skis, and she's letting me pull her baby. So she must have had far more confidence in my skiing skills than I ever thought I could have. But it was really great. I managed to get out on skis about 7 times before the trip. It's slightly different technique, but it was good to get used to the snow and the feel of being on skis. The other thing with a trip like this is gear. Preparing your gear is almost as big a deal as preparing your body. There is so much kit that you need. I actually ended up hiring from an expedition gear hire company in the UK. So I popped into Wales, where they are, and you can see all these boxes with all this gear behind us. Yeah, so there's me with balaclava. I promised that's for the trip and I wasn't robbing anyone. And on the right hand side, I've got kind of fur-lined salopettes and a big jacket and the hat and everything. I didn't end up using some of the kit because it did that cold. It got to about -25, but it wasn't -40 temperatures. But you needed to have this gear with you because you have to prepare for the worst. So let's talk about the actual trip. We've done the training, we've got our gear, we're ready to go. So this was my wonderful team, and I had never met any of them before I went. So we met a couple of days before we started in early March. On the right-hand side, you'll see Liv and Ingvild with the dog Selma. So Liv and Ingvild were our guides, and Selma is actually Ingvild's husky. So normally they have a male husky that they take, but because this was an all-female trip, they actually switched the dogs and had a female dog as well, which I thought was wonderful. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see us 5 women. I'm in the middle, blinding us all with our head torch. And then there is Eve, Sally, Maddie, and Kirsty as well. And again, we're just, apart from Sally Orange, she's the one with the stripy hat. She's run marathons dressed as fruit on every continent. She's completely balmy in a wonderful way, and you should check her out. So I don't think she even trained for the expedition. She just rocked up and was like, oh, this is easy. But yeah, on the whole, we're all everyday women. We've never done anything like this, and we were all there to try and prove to ourselves that we were capable of more than what we thought. This was the first night, so we were running a bit behind schedule, and we ended up actually starting at night time when it was dark, and the aim was to go 2 kilometers. So to get onto the plateau, you start at the road, but you have to go up and then you get onto the plateau. So our first time on skis with fully packed pulks. So mine is there. You can see it with the ice drill on top. 50 kilos, if not a little bit more, because they've got all the food and everything. It's the first night. And the first thing we do is go up a giant hill. We managed 500 meters. We were aiming for 2 kilometers, and at 500 meters, which took so long, Liv was like, that's it, stopping, set the tents up. And then you go to set the tents up, and you realize you need to flatten the snow, you need to put the tents up, you need to dig holes, you need to clean them out, you need to try and get warm, you need to cook your dinner. So it's another 2 hours when you finish skiing for the day. So we got to the top of that hill and we set the tents up, and I just remember us looking at each other and just going, how are we ever gonna be able to do this for 2 weeks? Like we just skied 500 meters and we all feel like we just felt absolutely shattered. So that was a real wake-up call. Oh, there's a close-up of the dog, by the way. I just thought you all deserved a close-up of the husky. Just throw Selma in there. She was wonderful. But I have to say, the first night was really hard and it was a real wake-up call. But then you wake up to days like this, where it's completely clear and completely and utterly still, and you just have the incredible landscape and you're the only ones in it. So the hard parts, which were often outweighed by the good. No matter what happens, even the bad moments were amazing because you're so humbled to be in the environment that you're in. So this here was one of the rare, calm, warmish days with the kind of clear skies and very flat landscape as well. And yeah, on days like this, you'd have a bit more time to maybe pose for some photographs, to have a bit of fun. In this photo, I'm actually only wearing, I've got like a string vest thing, which is a really good bit of gear that I bought in Norway, and a waterproof jacket. It was about -20 on this day, but I weirdly didn't find it that cold, especially when you're moving. And you just shove your down jacket on if you stop for too long and you keep fairly warm. So this one here, I want to talk to you a little bit about weather. So this here looks quite calm and picturesque, but if you look at the kind of the ground, you'll be able to see swirls of the snow and the spin drifts of the snow. So there's actually a huge amount of wind in this photo, and you can see from the direction it is going directly into our face. So we had a lot of days like this, where you're skiing and the wind is just, it's so strong and it's right in your face and it's freezing your eyelashes and your buff, and it's kind of like trying to ski through treacle. You actually got used to the weight of the pulk. You know, on a ground like this, as long as the snow wasn't too deep, especially like this, because it kind of blew the top of the snow off, so you hit the ice underneath. You didn't really feel the weight of the pulp, but you did feel the wind pushing into you. But at the same time, even though this was one of the hardest weathers to walk in, it became my absolute favourite. And I really look forward to moments like this because it's just so beautiful. You become mesmerised by the swirling snow on the ground and the kind of the changing clouds in the distance which merge into the floor. And you just, even when it's hard, like I said, it just becomes such an incredible place to be that you forget how hard it is and you're able to lift yourself out of what you're doing and focus on where you are. There we go. So, hills. The plateau is pretty much flat, but not as flat as you think it would be. You know, it might be flat for 70%, but 30% of not flat is horrific when you're on skis and you don't really know what you're doing. So this is a hill that you wouldn't even notice if you were just hiking. It took each of us probably 5 minutes each, if not longer, to get up. And you can't take your skis off because you'll just go straight waist down into snow. So you kind of have to turn your body and walk up sideways, and the pulk is pulling you backwards. And it's so difficult. And we were just stood here clapping and cheering. And again, it's these moments where you really at some point think, I can't do this. Literally, all I need to do is walk up 5 steps. It's 5 steps. I can't do it. And you just keep pushing yourself. And with the support of your team, you slowly start to realize that you can do it. These little hills actually became, with hindsight, weirdly quite enjoyable because each time you just push yourself a little bit further. The hills, when we saw them in the distance, you're just like, oh no, here we go again. Let's talk a little bit about weather. So this is Maddie. I hope she doesn't mind me stealing this photo, but she had the best icy face photo. For some reason, I think I just sweat a lot and my face didn't get that icy. But it did get quite cold. So we had to prepare for temperatures of down to -40. Thanks to climate change and global warming, it's been getting warmer and warmer each year. We kind of averaged around -15 to -20, but sometimes with days it could be a lot colder with the wind chill. And it turned out that the wind chill was actually the thing that really kind of got you. Like I said, with the photo with the spin drift of the snow. But you know, it did get cold, and you really had to look after yourself, look after your face, look after your fingers, look after your toes, keep warm. Worse than this though was the temperature when it hovered around kind of 0 to -1. So when we first started up in the north, we were closer to the coast, and because it was milder, when it's -1, it's wet snow, and that was actually a bit of a nightmare because the gear gets wet. When it's really cold and you have, you know, just cold snow, you just brush it off of you and you don't get wet. So again, the temperatures on this trip and the weather is really probably one of the most challenging things to deal with. There we go. We had so much whiteout. So we were there for 13 days in the end and 12 nights. We were short one night. We'll get to that. And I feel like half the time was spent in whiteout. And I've never been in whiteout before, not in any environment like this. And the strangest thing about whiteout is navigation. So if you think about being out in the mountains or anything like that and you're navigating, obviously you can take a bearing and you can look into a landmark in the distance and you can walk towards it, have a natter, have a chat, you know, go on your merry way. When it's a whiteout like this, it's very different. With a whiteout, you would send one person in front. So you can see the bottom left-hand photo there is Sally Orange. She's actually got her orange costume on. She's wearing like a segment of orange. And Orange is her real name. So she was good to spot out the front. So you could send her out the front, and then the person behind in the chain would have the compass, and they're saying left, right to the person out in the front. And they're the ones that are moving to try. They are the bearing that you're focusing on. If you think you walk in a straight line, I guarantee you can't. No one can. It seems absolutely impossible. Apparently, we all have a super strong left or right leg, and then you turn that way, and you swear blind. I'm going straight, and someone behind you going left. and you could put your life's money that you're going in a straight line, and you are absolutely not. So this became quite a challenging environment to be in. When you're out front, it's very, very challenging because you get exhausted. You've got nothing to focus on. You've just got white, and it actually becomes quite disorientating. And if you are doing the compass and the map work, it's very hard work. You've got you're still trying to pull your poke. You've got one hand here with your compass. You're trying to focus. But again, it was hard, but it was enjoyable in the same way because you're experiencing something so different, and you don't have any time to think about how hard it is, or to think about how difficult it is, or how challenging it is. And often in a group like this, if you ever do a trip like this and you're in a group, so you can see the line up the top there, we did a technique where we would basically rotate. So we would take it, maybe someone at the front would take 15 minutes, and then they'd rotate to the back. 15 minutes, rotate to the back. And it's a really great way to keep the pace going and to keep the group focused. And then on the bottom right hand side, you can see our 3 expedition tents on yet another morning of whiteout. Yes. The tents. Packing up the tents and putting down the tent in whiteout and windy weather. We're very lucky we didn't lose anything. One of the girls lost a hat. I lost a mitten at one point, which somehow Liv managed to catch. But we never lost anything important. But yeah, you can kind of see the weather here. It wasn't always friendly to us. So let's talk a little bit more about the camping, because for me, that was something I didn't really prepare for. I was so focused on the skiing and on being so worried about being physically able to do the skiing and to pull the poke and to do the distance. And even though I'd done long distance hiking before and with a big backpack, in my head I wasn't going to be able to do it, and I wasn't good enough, strong enough, brave enough, and all of these things. And I was so focused on that, I never really thought about anything other than the skiing and being cold. Turns out I'm all right at skiing and the poke's not bad. But preparing camp, it nearly broke my back the first night when I realised that we had to dig these holes. It turns out I can't ever remember digging a hole before this trip. I know that sounds ridiculous. I've weeded a garden and stuff like that and built sandcastles, but I've never had to dig a lot. And when you're camping, there's a lot of digging, and that's what you should train for. So you can see you get the tents up and you have to be really careful, put them in the right direction with the wind to make sure you're doing anything, that the kitchen is away from the wind so you don't get filled with snow. Then you kind of put all the stakes in. You can see that we use the skis to keep the tent in, and then you fill cover the flats with the snow, and then you dig a hole, which on the top photo you can see Kirsty there digging a hole. I promise I did dig holes. Kind of so that you can get in and out easier, and then on the bottom right you can see the end result. So and you sometimes had to build a little wall to stop the wind from coming in, and you also had to dig toilets as well. So you dig a toilet somewhere around the camp, not too close, not too far. And my claim to the fame with the trip is that after 2 weeks I could finally dig an okay toilet. So that's one thing that I can be proud of. So we did plan to camp the entire way, but a few things led us to huts instead. And originally I was kind of being one of those purist people that was like, I want to camp, I want to be hardcore, I want to say that I did it all and blah, 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 blah. Turns out it doesn't really matter, and that's just a stupid attitude anyway. So on, I think this was the 2nd or 3rd night, and because we'd had those mild weathers, 2 of the girls' sleeping bags had got wet. They had down sleeping bags, and it would have been really, really difficult knowing that we were going into really, really cold weather to have wet gear. So we headed to this trapper's hut, and there's these trappers located all around the Finnmark Plateau that used to be used by hunters, and some of them still are. So we headed to this tiny one that's just a tiny dot on the map, and actually the hill that I showed you earlier was getting to this hut. So you can see on the left-hand side, completely covered in snow, that is the top third of the door that you can see there. So we had to dig really far down to get into the hut. Did not do the digging. We'd probably still be there now if I was doing the digging. I went and put the tents up instead. But yeah, once we were in there, you can see on the right-hand side this tiny little hut, and it was amazing to have a night there in in the warmth. There was a tiny little kind of cast iron fire where they could start the fire and dry their stuff, and 2 people slept in there and the rest of us slept outside. The floor had a bit too many mouse droppings on it, but it ended at huts that actually kind of added a lot of character to the trip. And this was my favourite hut. So again, not planned, but it turns out that we were all pretty good at skiing and surviving in cold and just doing all right. And we ended up having enough time to do a rest day. So we were averaging kind of, after our first day of 500 metres and 6 kilometres the next day, not great. We were eventually kind of averaging around 15 days. We were on really good, sorry, my headphone. We were on really good timing. So we ended up with a rest day, and this is a tiny little 2-bed emergency hut, but it was actually decorated quite nice. It was like, I'd live in it like a tiny house, to be fair. But because it was nice and clean, we decided that even if there was 2 beds, it doesn't matter, we can fit 5 of us in there. So you can see the 2 beds there. You can see Sally, who is between the beds, and there's actually a table above her. Maddie, in the left-hand side of this photo at the top, is actually under the bed. It was like a 20-centimetre space that she managed to sleep in and said she had a great night's sleep. And then Kirsty, who I've attempted to give some modesty to, was by the door, and she couldn't go any further to the right because there was a giant hot fire there. But we had one of the best nights in this hut. And again, it's funny, you spend all your time in tents and with, all your eating and you're in the cold. And like, this is the epitome of luxury. And it shows you just how little that you need in life to be happy. And then this was the last night's accommodation. This was a really interesting hut, actually, because we'd actually had a phone call telling us that a big storm was coming. And we had 2 options. We either needed to ski 20 kilometres to get to the tree line, so that we could try to shelter in the forest, or we could go about, I think it was about 12 kilometres to this, but we had no idea if this hut even existed. Liv hadn't seen it for, I think it was 2 years. So we hoped it was still there. We decided to go for it, and we were really lucky. We got there and it's actually in really good condition. So we had to dig the door out. There was no fire. There was a few kind of holes in the wall, but it was clean, it was solid, and we had a really safe and again fun night being able to sit out the storm. There was even a long drop toilet in there, believe it or not, which was a right luxury and quite clean, although strangely tall. You had to be really tall. And there was also some British Army ration packs. So the British Army had been in there at some point doing their training. Like I said, the plateau's used for training for quite a few things, including the army. And then this here is, we're outside the hut just as the storm is brewing. So you can see that kind of really wouldn't have been fun to ski in. So I'm so happy that we sat the afternoon and the evening out. And later that night, it was the first time that we saw really, really good northern lights as well. So to be in the middle of nowhere in this little tin hut and just watch the northern lights with nobody else around is one of the most magical ways that I will ever remember. And I'll also remember later on that night when I went out on my own into the storm, and that was very cold and windy. So as you can see, there were lots of highs and lows of the trip, and sometimes it was really hard. Sometimes you just got into the rhythm of it. You just got into the rhythm of it, and you just got on with it. And you didn't think whether it was hard or whether it was not hard or whether it was good or bad. You just did it, and you just got on with it. But when you think about the trip, really, there was 3 things that stand out to me as to what made it so special. The top one is food, not going to lie. Turns out that food can solve any and all problems in the Arctic. So there we are eating dry food. We actually had some really great food, actually, not just dry food, because obviously it's the Arctic, so you can keep stuff frozen. So we had fresh fish and we had like vegetables. But yeah, food. Basically, you can ski for 2.5 hours, and you think that you're going to have all these deep thoughts about and what your energies are in life and your greater purpose. All you're thinking about is what snacks you've got left. That's it. 2 hours. 2 hours of thinking, is my Snickers still frozen, or has it like thawed against my body heat? Have I got a leftover gummy bear stuck in my kind of coat pocket that I can have. Or I wonder if I've got any hot chocolate left in my thermos. I swear to God, that's the extent of my thinking. So food was everything. On the left at the bottom is dancing. So if you're ever going to do a trip like this, don't fight it, embrace it. You need to learn the Macarena and you need to learn the hokey pokey. You might think that sounds crazy, but you need to keep your hands and your feet moving, because when you stop, that's when you get cold. When you're skiing, it's fine. Like I say, I skied a couple of days, not even with the waterproof, just with the string vest on. But as soon as you stop, that's when you're really at risk of getting frostnip or frostbite or worse. And the Macarena is the most incredible thing because it moves all of your digits. But we must have looked completely and utterly balmy, just these kind of multicoloured big puffer jacket women doing the Macarena all over the plateau. So yeah, I hope Google Maps wasn't doing anything on those days. And at night time, the okie dokie great, because again, it just kind of really kind of gets you warm, and you really need to be warm before you get in your sleeping bag at night. And on the bottom right hand side is the people.
Here's a result from search.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My Google seemed to think I was talking to it. I'm just going to turn my phone off. How bizarre. Yeah, and on the bottom right hand side, it's the people. It's the people that get you through any of the tough times. I didn't know any of these women before I went on this trip, and you get to know them with 48 hours better than most people know you at home. They get to see you happy, they get to see you sad, they get to see you hangry. I was often hangry. They get to see you when you stink and you haven't showered for 14 days. They get to see you when you are in absolute awe of where you are and what you're doing, and in awe of each other. They get to see you when you're angry. Like a couple of times I just got really angry, particularly wearing mittens and trying to do zips up. Just irrationally angry. Really just terrible at mitts. And the friendships and the bonds that you form with one another are just absolutely magical. So yeah, the trip was beautiful and mesmerizing and terrifying and horrible and wonderful and a real mishmash of emotions. But the food, the dancing, the people, the landscape is worth every single second. There was also a saying that we had on the trip, which I think Liv said at the beginning: the big things become small and the small things become big. I kind of touched on that a little bit, but for me, this trip, it was a real personal middle finger to myself, if that makes sense. I was telling myself, up yours. You've been telling yourself for years that you're crap, that you're rubbish, that you're unfit, that you're fat, that you're unhealthy, that you aren't capable of anything. And this trip was my way of telling myself to shut up, and that you can do it, and that you are okay, and that, you know, so what, you were useless at PE at school and hate running, whatever. Like, we're all capable of doing things. So I thought that I would spend a lot of this trip kind of thinking about that, and thinking about the, you know, the issues and challenges that I've had with body confidence and self-confidence and the rest of it. But the big things become small, the small things become big. All of those emotions went away, and all I thought about was Snickers, and if I needed the loo, or if I was warm enough, or you know, did I have another podcast on my thing that I could listen to at night. The big things just didn't matter. And I think that's the most wonderful thing of a trip like this, is that you start to realize how little those things really mean in the grand scheme of things, as long as you are safe and you're healthy, and you have good people, and you're smiling, and you have good values, and you're just kind of doing the best that you can. Oh, there we go. And I think that attitude really helped, because we left at the beginning of March. We were gone for 2 weeks. And when we started the trip, COVID-19 was a thing. It was in the press, but it wasn't really, you know, no one was cancelling holidays or flights or anything like that. It was very much, didn't seem that serious. So on the left-hand side, you can see me, a little bit of ice on my eyelashes, and my frozen buff, completely frozen with my own spit. That's wonderful. You get used to that as well, by the way. Completely frozen. You could knock on that, and it would be like knocking on a door. So yeah, there's me wearing my version of a face mask, and I had no idea that I'd be skiing back into a world where face masks are pretty much mandatory. So we got a phone call on the satellite phone 4 days from the end of the trip, and we were told you might want to leave. Norway's shutting its borders, whole of Europe is closing down. You should try and get out. But it's not that easy when you're crossing on an Arctic plateau. So we had two options. One was to leave, but we were still 2 days ski away from a road where we could be picked up, and the storm was coming. So that hut that I mentioned, that was happening. So we knew that there'd be at least kind of 12 hours in an afternoon and night when we couldn't do anything. So we're talking 3 days, and we only had 4 days of the trip left. And when I say that we could ski to a road, we're still at the top of Norway and need to get flights from the south. So we made the decision as a group, and it was quite difficult to keep going. But again, that saying, the small things become big, the big things become small. When you're in that environment, you're able to just focus on your immediate needs like that. So we did keep going. We ended up finishing one night early. So we got across the plateau, and the last night we were supposed to sleep in the forest and then ski 7 kilometers through the forest to Karasjok the next day. But because it had got quite serious, made it across the plateau, and the decision was made to be picked up and miss that last night. And it was a really good decision because it turned out to be very, very difficult to get out of Norway. We arrived back to kind of civilization, I guess, to emails with flight cancellations and just having no idea. So to go from 13 nights, 13 days with no phones, no outside contact, to landing in civilization and suddenly being on your phone trying to sort out flights and everything. None of us had the time to process what we'd achieved. We just went straight into this crazy new world that we lived in. But now I've been back for a few weeks, I've realized that what I learned on that trip is very, very helpful for getting us through this situation that we're in right now, which is about focusing on the small wins, focusing on the fact you're safe, that you're well, that you are, smiling, that you have good people around you, and just kind of focus on those things instead. So it was a very surreal experience to come back from that. And for me particularly, because I couldn't get back to Switzerland, and my accommodation had been cancelled in Switzerland where I live. So I kind of was a little bit homeless as well. I've kind of managed to find a short-term rental in England, so I can't complain too much. It's got horses and dogs, so it's even better, really. There you go. So despite coming back to the world that we now live in with COVID-19, I couldn't stop smiling. So this is me, the first time I haven't got anything on my head in 14 days. My hair is disgusting. I stink. I've got something stuck in my teeth. I'm sunburnt. My rosacea's flaring. I've got my phone doesn't recognize my fingerprints on my thumb because kind of I got a little bit of frost nip. I've been wearing the same clothes for 14 days, 14 nights. We had one underwear change on day 7 that I treated myself to, and absolutely just filthy. And I've never been so happy or felt so good about myself as I did in this moment. Getting there and realizing that everything that you tell yourself is wrong. Every mean word that you've ever said about yourself is wrong, and that you can do anything you put your mind to. I couldn't care less about my hair or my face or anything like that. So yeah, that's kind of the big smiles despite everything. So a couple of things, I guess, if you guys were planning on doing a trip like this. The training, so I've put a big cross out here of my training. I'm not saying don't pull Trevor and Tim around. Definitely get yourself a Trevor and Tim and pull them around. The core strength is incredible. I actually quite miss it. All I've done since I got back is eat biscuits. So I quite miss pulling the tyres. I could eat what I wanted back then. Here's what I would do with training though. I'd pull Trevor and Tim. I would wear mitts for at least 6 months in everything you do. The Scottish girls on the trip, they were like pros with mitts. They could undo zips, do up zips, open thermos, anything. I couldn't do anything at all with mitts, which meant I constantly had to try and get my hands out, and then I'd get cold hands, and then I'd get frozen hands. So yeah, wear mitts, practice with mitts. Second thing, this is more for the women than the men. Learn how to hold a squat for a very, very long time. So I apologise to Kirsty. I was taking a selfie and turns up there's someone taking a wee in the background, and that happens more than you think as well. You think, oh, this is a beautiful view, and then you're like, uh-oh. Yes, going to the toilet in the wind whilst wearing salopettes in the -20 requires some very, very firm thigh holding squats. So work on your wall squats. Digging, just learn to dig, get into your garden, dig a hole, get to the beach, dig. Yeah, they're my 3 practical bits of kind of advice. And the 4th one is just do it. Just do it. I think if I can do this trip, anyone can do this trip. It really is more about your mental mindset than it is your physical self. It's about just being positive and telling yourself you can do it. And then also when you're having the moments where you're doubting yourself or where you're hating it, embrace it, because you're not going to like it for 24 hours a day for 14 days. But again, 95% of the trip is incredible. So that 5%, embrace that as well, because it's all part of the experience. But yeah, that's it really. I just think it was the most wonderful, incredible, humbling experience to be able to truly immerse myself into this environment with such wonderful people. And I would recommend it to anyone. And I really hope that what I learned about myself and about other people and about the world that we live in, that I can keep hold of what I learned while I was out there, and kind of take it on with me moving forwards. There you go. Thank you so much for listening. I was told 40 minutes, so I think that's about right. I should probably shut up now. Thank you so much for listening to Ramble, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Brooke, that was just fantastic. Well done. That was really, really good. And if you were in a live version of these adventure talks, the whole crowd would be going wild.
Thank you.
No, fair play to you. Come here, if anybody has any questions, maybe just type them into the text box on the bottom of this. I know on Facebook there was a nice crew of people tuned in, and there's a few questions on that. So I think what we're going to do is, Brooke, if I maybe ask you a question here, and then I'll click over to Donal on the Facebook live feed, and he'll ask you a few questions from there. And then if we have any more questions from here, we can ask those. So I suppose my question, Brooke, would be, how did you mentally cope? So if you're in a sort of challenging situation out there, like say the cold or fatigue or whatever, how did you mentally cope with that? Was there any strategy that you put in place?
You know what? That was actually part of my training that I didn't mention. So I did kind of touch on the fact that I have a few issues around exercise and around kind of physical movement and stuff, but I've actually had a lot of anxiety and panic attacks as well when I'm in competitive environments. So I tend to avoid them. I do a lot of solo stuff so that I don't have to compare myself to anyone. So I had kind of given myself a few techniques to be able to deal with any anxiety or panic that came along. So I gave myself some breathing techniques to be able to get through. I also had decided before the trip that I would be very honest with everybody about my concerns. And I think that on a trip like this, you need to be really honest with your teammates. You need to say, this is who I am. This is what I think I might struggle with. This is what I need from you if I get to that point. But I was actually so surprised at myself. I was fine. And I didn't have any of those things I thought I would. So for me, it was about dealing with those, like you say, when it was when you were too cold or you were exhausted or whatever. I would say embrace the fact that you're not enjoying that hour. In the next hour, you're going to love it, because it really was. You would have like a morning where you're just like, oh, I'm so tired. Oh my God. And then you'd have like, a cup of coffee and a biscuit at break, and you'd be like, I love my life. This is amazing. Oh my God. Oh, it's so pretty. Like, it's gonna pass. It's gonna pass. And just as well, be prepared practically. So you know it's going to be cold. Bring hand warmers. Make sure your gloves. You've got dry gloves. Make sure that you get used to putting your kit somewhere where you can get things easily. And also tell your teammates if you're having a bad moment and you are, at the front or something, and you're leading and you're struggling. Say, do you know what, guys? I'm going to take a break and slip to the back now. And I think, and I'm not saying that it happened with a mixed group, but it being an all-female trip really helped in that kind of situation to be really open with one another. We didn't have any fears or bravado or anything that perhaps we might have presumed would exist in other environments. But yeah, be honest with each other, be prepared, and embrace it.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, Brooke. Donal, if you're there, do you want to click in and maybe flick on with a few of the Facebook questions? Good man, Donal. We can't hear you, Donal, but your mic is on. Donal, I think I'm going to have to look them up for you because we can't actually hear you for some reason, even though it must be on your laptop. So just bear with me, Brooke. Or everybody here,
yep. No worries.
On this crew we can see you, Donal, and you're looking gorgeous. You're looking amazing there. Now you're looking fantastic. But just be there, Brooke, now for a second. What type of tent did you use there, Brooke?
So the tents did belong to the expedition company. I don't know the exact brand. I can try and find out for you. But yeah, they were big kind of tunnel tents, which are safer to use in the wind and a bit more sturdy. Yeah, and managed to fit 3 people in them.
Okay, and a question from Ash Varma. She said, wonderful talk, well done. Did you use special skis?
Yes, we did actually, because I couldn't get the skis that we had in Switzerland, and Switzerland's like does loads of cross-country skiing, but these were actual what was the brand? But basically, yeah, they're particularly for this sort of Arctic skiing. So they're kind of like they're thicker, and they had skins on the bottom, and they had metal edges, and they're wider than the kind of traditional Nordic cross-country skis.
Okay, somebody just put up there's a few texts that I'll let you reply to yourself after this, but Paul Donoghue just said Donal is just speechless after all of the talk. But if we don't have any other questions, there's a couple of other questions here, but they're more sort of like, thanks very much. Your infectious enthusiasm is very encouraging, and thank you, well done, and hello from Kerry, and etc. etc. So well done, you. It's great to see. But I suppose for the last thing I'd like to say is first, thank you very much for all the work you put into that now, and it was great I think it's a great forum to share it on here, which is brilliant for all of us to see. And just to let people know that I see Stephen Dowds is listening in here and watching in tonight. So if I don't say this, I'll be dead meat, in that he'll be on next week, which is our last talk till November, I'd say. So if people would like to join in to Stephen's talk next week, that would be great. But Brooke, thank you so much. That was brilliant and inspiring for many, and we'll have it up on the YouTube channel tomorrow. So if people want to spread the link from there, or it'll be up on the Facebook link as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it, and thank you for listening to the story.
Okay.
Thank you.
In Ireland, Brooke, come on over to thanks TA. TA tuned in, I think, from she lives over in Nova Scotia, I think, or in Canada, Eastern Canada. So that's very good. She's into this sort of stuff herself. So thanks, TA, for signing in there. Brooke, if you're ever in Ireland, come to Kinvara and we'll show you where the normal talks usually take place.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'll be here next week watching Stephen's too. So thank you again, everyone.
Okay. Thanks for everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Thanks.
Bye.
Slán. Oh, Sailward. Okay, sorry. Thanks, Tomas.
Bye.